The title of my thesis is Imaginary Deserts, Fiction and Travel in the Shadow of the Bomb, 1945 to 2001. And I'm looking at English language novels published between the bombing of Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1945 and the 11th of September, on the 11th of September 2001. And my thesis captures this as the age when the principal threat to society was perceived to come from the level of the state in the form of atomic weapons programs, and accordingly the protection from that threat also came from the level of the state. And this meant that civilians who were assumed to accept the protection of the state were also implicated in the state's policies, including its nuclear deterrence. My theory draws on the thinking of Baudrillard and his idea of how society is comprised of endless reproductions of simulacra, such as photographs, TV screens, and nuclear weapons, and how these ultimately make society into a meaningless desert of the real, that's what he called it. My thesis sets out the idea that the Western nuclear state's control and dissemination of information about the Soviet nuclear threat and of its own nuclear deterrence functioned to maintain its citizens' loyalty in the ideological standoff of the Cold War. Visual and audible stimuli bombarded the Cold War citizen. They were powerless in the face of the bomb, but compelled to trust in the nuclear capabilities of their own state. This meant that they were effectively expected to just get on with everyday life and do the shopping, but at the same time be ever aware of the possibility that the drum might bomb. And this meant that they were never able to stop worrying, but they also had to learn to love the bomb simultaneously. In short, nuclear paranoia was used to encourage political conformity. Now, paranoia is a thought process heavily influenced by anxiety and fear and the neural circuitry involving the hippocampus. And it's the basis for disorders such as schizophrenia, bipolar, and borderline disorder. And one upshot of paranoia is dissociation. So what this means is that the problem with using paranoia to inspire loyalty is that too much paranoia can effectively lead to dissent. When the brain receives stimuli, such as the image of a mushroom cloud, it breaks it up and it fragments it throughout the cerebral cortex to the different parts of the cerebral cortex that can best interpret those components. Then it puts them all back together again into something it can understand. Now, what this means is that stimuli such as state propaganda can never be passively accepted. The individual always reconfigures them to its own meaning. So, the idea is that political dissenters are more likely to question the propaganda than people who aren't. And some people might head off into the woods like the Unabomber and build fertilizer bombs. Other people might choose to get away from society and travel and encounter new stimuli. And this fits in with the established idea that travel expresses attention with one's home place. Freud says that travel is ultimately antisocial, and Foucault talks about antisocial practices being classified as mental disorders by the state. I take this further by saying that travel also actively facilitates political dissociation by bringing the traveller into contact with alternative stimuli. I don't know what's going on here. Now, the paradox of the heart of nuclear society is metaphorically embodied in the hippocampus, where paranoia is detected, because the hippocampus straddles the two hemispheres of the brain, so it sort of represents east and west. Also, long-term sufferers of paranoia, the back of the hippocampus tends to be smaller, whereas people who are good at travelling, who travel a lot are good at navigation, such as taxi drivers, have a larger hippocampus. So in the hippocampus itself, you can see the tension of the Cold War dissident. One effect of dissociative states can be a tendency to try and preempt what is feared. So obviously in the case of the paranoid nuclear citizen who's powerless in the face of the bomb, which can turn cities into a wasteland, they can reclaim psychological agency by taking themselves to a desert, as if the apocalypse have already happened. And thereby they're travelling from Baudrillard's desert of the real to the real desert, so they're travelling from a space of negative meaning to one of positive meaning. Full of flowers. Breathe. Now, it's true that while society is where the bomb is consumed, the real desert is where it's produced and tested. Obviously, the bomb tests were in the desert. However, Western traditions of representing the desert through the ages does always cast it as a place away from society, a place of retreat, a space of the unconscious, a space of madness, Monty Python. So this paradoxically allows the dissident the psychological space to step away from their nuclear paranoia. On one level or another, all the texts I look at, the Westerners who go to the desert blank any sign of Western society there and create a fancy uncontaminated by Western society. Now, you can't escape the threat of nuclear war or of fallout, even in the Sahara. But at the same time, the desert is genuinely different from Western society, so consequently it becomes a psychological space without any boundaries, which is attractive to people who question the certainties of Western nuclear society. In this way, the desert becomes a place of retreat, a space of the unconscious, where state propaganda fragments and where the individual can construct their own meaning and learn to stop worrying about the bomb. The novels I look at all feature Western civilians choosing to travel to the Sahara, or in one case to an archetypal fancy African desert. I'm reading their desire for travel and how they engage with the desert, where they can shake off their preconceptions about it, as a reaction to the demands of Western nuclear society. I've got 6 texts, which form 6 chapters, one for each decade between the 1940s and the 1990s. So they form a beginning, middle, end framework, and each pair also share a common trope. So these 2 are my first section, and they talk about Westerners going into the desert and becoming mad. And this takes us from the dropping of the bomb to the start of the anti-nuke protests in the States in 1961. This is the second section, and this deals with the desert as a site of death for the Westerner. And this takes us from the rise of the counterculture through to Gorbachev's secession in '84. And lastly, the last section, these deal with the desert as a site of alternative wisdom which can destabilise Western certainties. And this takes us from the start of Glasnost to the start of the war on terror.